Hey everybody, Riot Mort here with a bonus video. I wanted to take a minute to have a discussion about game balance and the state of TFT and things like that, and kind of talk about sort of where we are, how we got here, things like that. Because I know 14.2 really didn't land well with players, especially some of our higher elo players. And I know there's some caution around 14.3, but wanted to have a bit more of a dedicated talk to go through that and sort of hopefully come to an understanding sort of our approach and the way we think about things and go from there. So let's dive right in. Hopefully this isn't too long, but hopefully it's also a useful video for you to watch. What we're going to go over today is I'm going to talk about some of the constraints and goals when we're making a patch and sort of what we're trying to accomplish. As well as then I'm going to walk through some of the changes that we're doing next patch, as well as some community suggestions and go through those. I'll probably share some stats, a little bit more behind the scenes and sort of how we got there, as well as information that sort of guided the decisions to get us to where we're going. And like I said, hopefully we come out the other side and sort of come to an understanding of sort of how we got here, and hopefully it all makes sense. And like I said, hopefully this is educational and useful and a good use of your time. All right, so first off, I'm going to talk about the patching process here and a little bit how it works. And I want to be very clear up front. This doesn't have to matter to you, and this is not excuses, right? Like, at the end of the day, you're a player who's playing TFT, and all that matters to you is the game fun or not? If it's not, we need to do better, and it needs to be fun. That's it. So regardless of our patching schedule or any restrictions or whatever, doesn't matter. That's our problem. That's not your problem. We need to make game good. Period. Okay? Now, that being said, I'm sharing this with you so that you have insight onto a little bit of the behind the scenes about the process. That's it. My goal here is to simply inform you, not make excuses. This is just how we got there. And so, again, a given patch line, for example, the way it works is patch 14.2, that's the current live patch, goes live on a Wednesday, April 16th. From there, we have 2 days, Friday, April 18th, to directionally map out the patch and get everything localization locked. If there's any big swings, like a Kobuko rework, for example, that's going to require text change, that all needs to be done, locked in by Friday, 2 days after the patch. So any new text for like new hacks or a change in an ability. If an augment, for example, doesn't have a lever that we need to balance it, we need to make sure that the text is added for that lever by that Friday. So that all has to be in. And if we want to do any PBE testing, it actually has to be in by Thursday, so that it can deploy on Friday and be on the PBE so that we could test it that weekend. So if you've ever seen me do a Saturday stream where I'm testing stuff out, that means it was done by Thursday. So now after that date, all we can do are number changes, and most things already need to be set up, even if it's going to be reverted, because like worst case, it's like we put something in. For example, I think some of you saw like there was a Sejuani buff we were toying with for a bit to try to experiment with making her more tanky. Didn't really pan out, was too risky. Just pull it out. And so like that's kind of the process there. Then on Monday, so Monday the 21st, we lock the patch. At the end of the day, the patch has to be locked, completely done. That way people like our QA partners have time to test things, as well as that way we can share the patch notes with people like our FFGS partners who are working on that game, so they can get it out as well, and give everything done, get it all deployed. That way it's ready to go for the patch the following week. Now, there is one exception to this, which is we can make a patch changes through our micro patching process the following Monday on April the 28th. That's today. By the way, I'm filming this at like 9 p.m. on Monday. It's a little late. So if I mess things up, it's because I'm tired. Sorry. But these are costly, as it takes more engineering time to do these micro patches, as well as QA resources to double check them. And then if we A-patch anything, we can't B-patch it. So we're leaving ourselves open to a possible situation where like we can't fix things properly. So we try to avoid A-patches where we can. They also need to be very small. We can't have an A-patch that's like 50 things. That's not a thing. So now spoilers, there is an A-patch that's coming. One of the nice things about A-patches is that from most players' perspective, it's not actually a patch. It's just part of the patch. Like if you've ever seen me do a rundown, and then the patch notes are slightly different, that's because we made a change with an A patch, and so players just see new patch notes. Cool. So it's a cool feature that we can do sometimes if we screw anything up or need to make changes. So it's an option there, and we will exercise that tool. So nice tool to have, but overall, that's kind of how the patch process works. So for example, if you see something on April 22nd and you're like, why is that in there? That's based on our current read at that given date. All right, so when we're creating a balance patch, there's really, I've talked about this before on stream a lot of times, but there's really 3 things we can use. The first is data, and this is going to be, our internal data, which has things like LP delta, which is a fancy thing for average finish. So for example, if you have a Vayne 2 on 2-1, what is your expected average finish? That's something we've got. But some of it is also just stuff that you guys see as well on the external sites, things like tactics.tools or meta TFT, where you can see like how are certain items performing relative to each other, or how are certain traits performing relative to each other at the end game state. And so some of that data you guys can actually see for yourself. Others we have a little bit more access into, maybe not as much as you guys think. Like we don't have the world's most expansive data collection that solves everything for us, but we do have a little bit more. And I'm actually going to share some of that later today to show you how we kind of got to some of our decisions. The second thing is player perception, right? One thing that doesn't necessarily matter is if data and perception don't match. So for example, if the data says 6 Bastion is broken, but player perception is 6 Bastion is terrible, we've got to figure out what's going on there. And we probably don't want to nerf 6 Bastion, even though the data might say so, because players are going to be like, what? That doesn't make any sense. Our perception is that it's bad. And so we need to be aware of what players are thinking. And we generally try to do this by looking at, various social media sites, watch various streams, things like that. Now, one of the things we have to be careful when we're doing this is that we don't end up too Western market centric or North American centric. So we often rely on some of our partners from like China or Korea who will help give us their reads on the meta as well, so that we get a diverse view of the perception of things, not just the North American view or the Europe view or anything like that. And we use that as another point of reference. And then the third one is just our general experience. We as like game designers, for example, might go, hey, when we were making Illaoi, we intended her to work this way. And when I'm playing her, it's not really working out that way. And I think she needs to be changed. So you can combine that with like, okay, my game designer experience is saying Illaoi needs to be changed, but the perception is she's weak, but the data shows she's fine. What should we do? And use those 3 things to make a decision around what needs to be changed. And so not all 3 of these are equal per se. Obviously, things like data can have more weight than, say, our own experience, but all 3 do need to be taken into account when creating a patch. So the other thing is that when we're creating a patch, there's some pretty higher overall goals of every single patch that is like what we're trying to aspire to. The first thing is that every champion has a path to success where investing in them is a correct call. So you can literally pick a champion at random here. I'm going to pick Elise, okay? Does Elise have a path to success where if you put 3 items on her and 3-star her, she has a path to success? If the answer is yes, great. It doesn't necessarily need to be an S-tier comp, but as long as there are situations where it's like, oh, if you have this augment with this setup, it can be right. We want to make sure those aren't too narrow, right? If the only way you could play Elise is if you have exactly this nitro augment and you 3-star kindred at 3-1, then she's playable. Like, that's not good. There need to be as many ways as possible, but that's kind of our goal and our guiding principle with the champions. And so as you do a pass, if you look at every champion and you're like, no, there's no way to play Elise carry, that's just not functional, we've got work to do. We've got to fix that. We want to make sure there are strategies at all cost levels, not a single bucket. It is a very bad thing if everyone's playing 2-cost reroll. Likewise, it's a very bad thing if everyone's playing 4-cost champions and there's no rerolls. We want to make sure that at any given point, people can play in the 1-cost bucket, the 2-cost bucket, the 3-cost bucket, the 4-cost bucket, and the 5-cost bucket. That is important. That's one of the goals. In addition, there need to be enough lines to create variety in endgame states and outputs. One of the most frustrating experiences in TFT is if you get to an endgame screen and you see 6 people playing the same comp. That is very frustrating. It creates a perception that like the game is stagnant, that there's not enough variety. If every game you play is just going to be 4 to 6 people forcing the same comp, that is a very bad thing. What we want is endgame screens where there are 5 to 8 different comps usually. If there's, if there's only 5, sometimes it can be people happen to play the same line. The goal here isn't every single screenshot ever sent to us has exactly 8 comps. That's not realistic. People are going to contest each other sometimes, but we want to make sure that variety is high. And then this one should go with obvious. It should be obvious, but players are having fun. They're having fun with the game. If the first 3 things are true, but nobody's having fun, we failed, right? So the game needs to be fun. Players of all skill levels need to be enjoying the game, having those exciting moments where they're like, oh my God, I just had the game where I hit Zac on 3-2 and I rolled a bunch of times. I hit 70 blobs. I had a great time. Like, that's important. There need to be those exciting moments in TFT. And the last one, just to call it out here, it's a bit of a constraint, but it is important. What we don't want is any particular patch to be overly complex or require relearning the game in excess. And so often this manifests as we don't want our patches to be, we've literally touched every champion, every augment, every item, every trait. Like, it's too much. So oftentimes when we're making a patch, it's like, well, we've already touched 20 champions, 5 traits, 20 augments. That's probably enough. We might have to wait on touching these other champs and these items. So we often have to make trade-offs sometimes where it's like, this patch is getting a little too big. It's time to cut the low important stuff. And so sometimes things get hit on the chopping block. Now, I think for sure there are definitely things where it's like, well, why didn't you cut the Shaco change about the tooltip and keep an item change? And it's like, well, oftentimes we try to group those up as well. Some have different costs. But like I said, the TLDR here is patch notes shouldn't be too big. So those are kind of our goals when preparing a patch. Now, again, I have to be fully transparent here. 14.2 was not a great patch. I believe I heard Froden say, his exact words were, I give it a C+. And even if we say, let's agree with that, you could say it's better or worse. I know a lot of people feel it's worse, but let's just say C+. That's not good enough. That's not our goal. Our goal is not to be a C+. Our goal is to be an A- at worst. We want really good patches, and we've done it before. The big thing about this patch is there was a hollow bow bug that really elevated Zeri that we didn't account for. And the biggest problem with that one in particular was because it was attached to hollow bow, and Exotech has, the situation where every player gets different Exotech items. It ended up in a situation where it felt out of your control. You could go into a lobby, you didn't have hollow bow access, but someone else did, and you felt immediately at a disadvantage. That is a big problem. That is very, very bad. That's not acceptable. In addition, there were lots of viable reroll strategies, things like Vayne, TF, Senna, Jinx, Rengar, things like that. But there weren't many 4-cost strategies, with the exception of Hollowbow Zeri. At the highest level, there was basically, the Vexotech comp that came out, and then a Vanguard Marksman high roll if you're really lucky, Brand Ziggs if you had a ton of resources, you got really lucky. But overall, really just not a lot of 4-cost lines. And then the other thing is that any other line that you could play really just required a lot of narrow circumstances to make happen, which means you felt like you had low agency to make a choice. It's like, well, these conditions weren't met, therefore I cannot play all these other options, therefore all I'm left with is Vexotech. So for example, Golden Ox is very playable, but you kind of need an emblem, you kind of need early starts, you kind of need a strong board, and if you don't have all of that and good health preservation and extra resources, it's not really playable and it's tough to play. Or, as I mentioned, the Brand line, which can work, but it's like you need items for Brand and Nico and Ziggs. Excuse me. And in the late game, even Kobuko, for it to go really, really well. And even then, it's like, so that's not really good enough. Or just so many comps that could be played, but they require very augment-specific setups. This could be a hero augment line, or something like Little Buddies to elevate something like Anima Squad, or an Anima Squad augment, And so when all the lines are only playable with specific augments, it creates a situation where a lot of options aren't in your control. Feels bad. And so again, this patch is not a success to us. We got to do better. So that's why we were working on 14.3. Now, the goal was to fix with 14.3 to be a fix. But as we revealed the patch notes and we did the patch rundown, the sentiment hasn't been great so far. The initial read on the patch was not great. I've talked about it before that, I and others will read a lot of the feedback on the various social media sites, and we see it. The response has been pretty bad. Part of this is there's a lot of reasons for this. There's a lot of conditions for this. There could be small things here, and we're going to dive into that a bit, but we hear you, right? And we've said this before throughout the years. We're always listening. We always want to make sure that we hear you. It's not going on deaf ears. TFT is a game about making you guys, the players, happy, and we need to fix that. So I do think 14.3 makes a lot of steps in the right direction, but I also understand after coming off of 14.2 why there's a lot of hesitancy here, and I want to dive into that a little bit. And I won't lie, some of this sucks to read. Like when you read comments like these, and they say sucks, right? Because again, I know some of you may not believe it, but our entire goal here is to make a game that you guys love. When you guys are happy and having fun, that's when we're happy because we did it. We like to see players having an enjoyable time, and when you're not, it hurts us. We want to do better. So it is what it is. But again, I understand it. A lot of this is coming from, you enjoy TFT and you want the game to be as good as you think it can be. And if it's not meeting that bar, it's frustrating. And so you express that frustration in a variety of ways. And I get that. So I want to take a particular piece of feedback and walk through it here. This particular player, who I think is a very good player, and I really admire their skill in the game. They did something that I think is actually really important here, is they didn't just say game bad. They didn't just say, I'm tired of bad balance, I'm tired of the game. They actually put a stake in the sand and said, here are the things I think need to change. And this is really, really valuable because we can have a conversation about this, right? Whether or not this player is right or wrong about particular things, they're basically putting themselves at risk. They're putting themselves out there and they're saying, hey, I think X needs to change. Maybe they write, I think Elise needs to be buffed. And why this is important is because let's say this player says, I think Elise needs to be buffed. And then next patch, Elise becomes S tier and they were wrong. They put themselves out there, and putting yourself out there and having an opinion on things that you might later be wrong about is risky. It's hard. Just saying balance bad, that's easy. Anyone can say that. You're never wrong because everyone's always going to feel that way to some extent about something. But this is very useful, and I really like this post. Even if, whether there's wording differences or whatever, it's a good post at its core because it's saying, here are the things I want to change. And so as a way of saying thank you for a post like this, and I saw a lot of people like agreeing with this or talking about this post and sort of going, I kind of agree with a lot of this. I wanted to use this post, and I'm going to take the time here for however long it takes. I don't know how long this video is going to be. And I'm going to go through every single suggested change in this list and talk about why we did or didn't do it, or maybe we missed it or we shouldn't. And I'm going to go through it. I'm going to share exactly how we got to this. Again, as a way of saying thank you to this player who I think went out there and did a good thing, trying to make the game they love get better. So let's dive in. And again, hopefully this is useful, but I'm just going to walk you through the logic of every single change here. All right, like I said, let's share about how we're thinking about all these changes. Now, everything I show here, the data is based on the top 1% of all players of all regions combined. So in our dashboard, we can do MMR all the way up to the top 1%. And we can go like, I just want to look at NA, or I just want to look at EU or China or whatever. This is all of that combined into one amalgamation. Now, this is to ensure we have a high enough sample size for all aspects. Now, I know there are folks out there, I've had this conversation before over the years. Some folks will say this is too high. This includes like grandmasters and low masters or high masters players, and we should only be looking at challenger players and like 1,000 LP plus. And I understand that perspective. I really do. But that is too small of a sample size and will not catch outliers. It will not catch situations. It becomes a very closed circular group that's like, this is what we believe is true. And so if that's not okay with you, this might all be moot. You might just be like, well, I don't care what that data says because the 1,000 LP players say this. I understand that, but it's what we work with. It's the stuff we base our stuff around. It is what it is. The other thing is that any data I show you from here on out, this is not the data we used to make the changes. This is actually the most recent data. So I took all the data from the most recent 4 days of being played. When we did this, we only had the 2 days or 4 days of the patch, but I wanted to show you the most recent things because the meta has shifted, things have changed. For example, Vayne was S tier at the beginning of the patch, but now is considered a little less. Let's see how she looks in the data now, so we can check that stuff. And then the last thing is, when it comes to things like augments, I cannot share exact numbers for things that aren't changing, because what we don't want is this to become like, okay, I think X augment is bad, and then I go, no, in data it's 4.5, and now you know it's 4.5. That's I can't do that. I will get in trouble. But what I can do is I can either mark them as OP, balanced, or weak. And to be clear, OP means 4.3 or higher. Balanced means 4.3 to 4.65. And weak means under 4.65. You could debate where these lines are. And in some cases, what I'm actually going to say is I'll say balanced, but near the top of balanced, or balanced but low in balanced. So I'm trying to at least give you some wiggle room here, but I will get in trouble if I reveal the exact numbers. I'm sorry. All right. So with that being said, I'm just going to go through every single line of this player's feedback and talk about them. So the first thing he says is revert to Dynamo nerf. We are already nerfing Aurora. Agree. I actually agree with this one. This was a small change either way. It was one of the low importance changes. So we put this in the A patch. We just reverted it. It's nice to shrink the patch. As I said, one of our goals is keep the patch smaller. And this was a small change. When we made this change, we were mostly directing it at some of the invisible team-wide power. To Dynamo in a comp like Vexotech, where you have the Morg and the Aurora, or Nitro Reroll with the Jhin and the Elise, it's actually providing a lot of invisible power. The 5 mana ticks are actually pretty meaningful. And it's one of those things that's like, it's hard to appreciate that power. And so we wanted to kind of pull back onto Dynamo without hurting 3 and 4. That way, if you invest in it, you get it. But agree that it might not be the right time to do this. There might be some work to do on other champions. And so for now, we're going to pull it. So agree for now. Revert Vayne nerf. Unit by itself is not even strong. Better to nerf Senna or Force Slayers. So this one I get. I understand the sentiment here. And if you watch like tournaments and things like that, Vayne wasn't performing. But even now, if we look at our data, and you can see here 2 graphs here, this is the average finish of 2 costs at 3-star and 2-star. Even today, Vayne is currently topping both of those at our top 1%. Vayne is the best. If you have a 2-star Vayne on 2-1, 2-2, 2-3, that is better than any other 2 cost in the game right now. And if you have a 3-star Vayne, that is better than any other 2 cost in the game by a pretty significant margin here. You can see that gap is pretty significant here. And so even right now, Vayne still looks strong. And in conjunction with the fact that we're buffing other parts of that comp, like things like Dr. Mundo and things like this, and the Vayne nerf itself was pretty small. For now, we are going to stick with this nerf. Using this data, we kind of want to get Vayne down to the other champions. Now, this person says better to nerf Senna. If Senna is doing better than Vayne, that's a good thing, right? Like 3 costs should definitely be outperforming 2 costs. We want that to be true. But Vayne also is going to be affected by like the Anima Squad buffs and things like that. So when we look at this data, the nerf still seems pretty justified, and I want to make sure that we get that in. In addition, here's the data for Senna. So this is Senna 3 compared to all the other 3-star 3 costs. And she's high up there for sure. She's no Jarvan, who we nerfed. Jarvan is that top line. But she's strong. And so again, if we nerf things like Jarvan and Vayne, that'll make Senna a little hard to play into. This will also lower Senna. And so if Senna goes down here, I'm not sure we need to go much further than this. So again, when we look at this graph, yeah, she's a little high, but it doesn't seem nearly as high as the Vayne data, which seems much more of an outlier compared to the other costs, which is why for now we're going to stick with the Vayne nerf. I think that's still relevant here. All right, revert Veigar nerf. New high score augment nerf is enough to keep him in check. Agree. This is another one where we're going to put this in the A patch. We're just going to revert it, shrinks the patch. Good. These changes on Veigar were based on early meta reads. But, you know, the meta has shifted, right? Like, if you go back to the days where we were preparing the patch, we were seeing players talk about how Veigar, after the bug fix, was broken. There were some tier lists that had Veigar in S or low, like high A tier. You can see an example here where at the time, player perception was that Veigar was very strong. That has changed. That has changed. And thankfully, we already had a small nerf anyway. So it wasn't going to be a big deal, but if something's already on the downturn and then to nerf it further feels pretty bad. And so this was a chance where we can just shrink the patch, revert the change. Great, no problem. But the reason we got here was you can check the timeline and where Vhagar was at the time of the patch. It made sense at the time, barely. And as this person insightfully does pointing out, one of the best success cases was that high score augment. That high score augment is being nerfed. That should help as well. So good things. All right. Not sure about TF change. Again, I really like this here because you know what? They're literally just saying, I don't know. I don't know. It's a complicated change and I'm not sure. And that's okay. It's okay to be not sure. I'd rather somebody honestly be like, look, man, I'm just really not sure versus it's different and it's bad. So I really like this honesty here. What I can talk about here is that the goal was to slightly bring down TF's best in slot version while elevating suboptimal builds so he can be an item carrier better in stage 2. If you look here, this is the round win rate of a TF2 in stage 2. And so if you compare that to every other 2 cost, the round win rate is pretty low, only above things like LeBlanc, who's obviously being used for Cypher, so her data always looks worse. And so we want to make sure that TF, like if you have a TF with a Shojin in the early game, that it's actually not the worst. And so that initial buff to his initial damage should be better, but we can't just buff that and keep him the same. So it's about to be neutral, but we'll see. We'll see how it lands. And again, if we're wrong, if we mess it up, we'll adjust quickly. But that was the logic here, is to try to make TF not be so hard bound to his best in slot. All right, revert Rengar nerf. Jinx is the main carry of any Rengar variations. And then later, I skip around a bit, but this player says nerf Jinx 2 and 3-star. That comes later. Now, this one's a little debatable. I actually think this one's very subjective, and there's an argument here that this player is right. We definitely have seen Jinx sort of be the damage star of these compositions. Even at looking at the data now, what you see, and this is, I believe this is Rengar 3 and Jinx 3, is that they're pretty damn close. Rengar 3 is the top line here that's highlighted, so a little overperforming Jinx 3, but obviously they're tied, right? Like this is a comp where these two are pretty tied together, and so if one gets nerfed, they're both going to go down, right? So we're going to see that happen. We haven't seen a lot of Jinx and Marksman, so the idea here was to pick a lane. And so again, the final call here is this is debatable. So what we decided to do was we wanted to nerf some part of it. So we went with the one that's frankly just more frustrating. And in this case, having a tanky Rengar who's jumping around, healing repeatedly is pretty frustrating. It's frustrating to deal with. So we went with a very light nerf to his health. Now what you're looking at here, this is the 2-star version and their round win rate. And what you'll notice is that Rengar, if you have a Rengar 2 over a Jinx 2, you're more likely to win rounds until about 4-2, and then Rengar falls off, which makes sense. That's when about melee champions really start to struggle, at which point Rengar 2 drops pretty low here. And so basically we know what this means is that Rengar will require 3-star in like stage 4. Otherwise he's going to fall off a cliff pretty hard. Again, I think this one's debatable. We'll keep in mind with it. But the reason we chose this between the two was that Rengar was a little higher on the graph in the 3-star and frankly just a more frustrating player experience. So that's why we chose Rengar over Jinx. Revert Brand nerf. He is decent. This nerf makes him bad or spat. Check to play 7th Street. Agree. This is another one where the nerf was already super tiny. It was like barely worth the patch note. So deleting this to make the patch smaller is great for us. And the other thing is that we have a better understanding. At the time, we were looking at Brand sort of going, he's really good. At the start of the patch, he felt like one of those comps that could compete. Now we have a better understanding of the composition and how much resources it requires to really succeed. And so we agree. We'll just revert this. It was tiny. It won't move the needle too much anyway. Hopefully things like the 7th Street Demon change make him better, and that'll be it. Now, that being said, there is one other change that's upcoming, spoiler, in 14.4, because we couldn't get it in time for 14.3, but we're going to do hopefully a quality of life change that is a buff, and that is going to be that his projectile will have a fixed travel speed. And what this means is if your target is close or far away, the fireball will travel in the same, let's say, 1.5 seconds. I don't know the exact time, sorry, but whereas right now, if you have 2 brands, one with a close target and one with a far target, the far one has to wait for that projectile to land before he can start autoing again. And so if you end up shooting a far away fireball, you end up losing some time. So hopefully this will feel a little bit better. That is coming in 14.4. But again, this was an easy one to just revert. It was such a small change anyway. No problem. Just remove Cyberdeck, bait augment, bad tailoring for stage 3, 2, and 4.2. So this is one where we're changing it. So this data that you're seeing here is off of when it was 2 items. And so we can share that because that data is not going to be relevant anymore. But when we looked at this augment, it had a 3.93 top 4 or 3.93 average finish. That is very, very good. Anything over 4.2 is considered pretty busted. So very, very, very strong augment. Only a 13% win rate. So the one thing to note here is that it doesn't cap that high. And that is going to be something that we're a little nervous about. But when you look at a 3.93 augment, we have to nerf it, right? Like, it was overperforming massively. Now, obviously, it's a giant nerf, right? Going from 2 items to 1 items. But we do still think the fact that you get to handpick which champion gets their item and which item that is should still make it pretty valuable here. And we expect it to be playable. But if we're wrong, like let's say this player's right and it ends up just being an absolute garbage augment at 5.0 or something like that, we will disable it. We do want to see where this lands though and see if that ends up being true or not. But again, if it ends up being terrible, we absolutely will disable it. We don't want 5.0 augments in the game, and there's nothing between 1 and 2. And we probably aren't going to do something creative where it's like get 1 item and they gain 300 health. There aren't really a lot of good options. So yeah, the real talk is here, we're going to ship this. If he's right, we'll remove it. And if he's wrong, cool, we have a balanced augment. So, all right, revert item collector 2 nerf, just a bad nerf. This is one where, again, I'm not sure this player is quite correct. When we look at our item collector 2 data, we have a 4.03 augment. If you take it at 4.2, it's actually a 3.96. It also has a 19.7 win rate. That's an insane win rate. Now, obviously, this needs to be nerfed, but one of the things we always have to be careful of is that this isn't just tied to something else. So, for example, is this tied to the success of things like Hollowbow Zeri and Vexotech? It might be. It might be. And as those comps become worse, we could totally see a world where Item Collector 2 goes all the way down to like a 4.6, 4.7. And if so, we'll adjust from there. But it would be irresponsible for us to look at this data and go, nah, let's just leave it alone. So I think this is a nerf that we absolutely need to do. And that's why we're going to do it. Revert Lucky Gloves nerf. Lucky Gloves in general is a mid-augment unless anvils, unstable component starts, etc. So again, this is another example where you look at the data that we have, and it's a 3.92 average finish, only a 12.4% win rate. So it is a little bit of a low cap finisher, but it's very consistent at top 4ing. Very, very good data. Lucky Gloves Plus, not quite as insane. It's at a 4.13, but has a higher win rate. So again, generally when we looked at these are very, very good. So again, given the high top 4 rate, we have to nerf these. Now, it's possible there's other causes. I've heard rumors of a Thieves Gloves bug, but we have not been able to reproduce it. If somebody has any video out there of a Thieves Gloves bug, we would love that. That would help us track that down, but we have not been able to find it. It also might just be that Exotech values this too well. And so if that's the case, like let's say it's just way too tied to Exotech, one thing we could possibly do to solve this would be Exotech only counts Thieves Gloves as 1 item instead of 3. And then if that's the case, we'll revert it. But given the time we had and the options, this felt like the right change for now. And that's one of the tough things about doing this job is that sometimes it's like, well, it's already Friday. We've got a lot of content to go through. We need to make a decision right now. What's the change we're going to make? And we make this decision. But again, looking at this data, it still feels like the right decision. And so I think for now, we're going to have to put this nerf out here. But again, as with everything, if that nerf ends up putting it at like 4.8 and it's terrible now, we will fix it. Revert Vex buff, not needed. Agree. This is another one that's in the A patch. The buff was already pretty small, and it was based on very early reads where there wasn't a lot of Vexotech quite yet, and there was a lack of Divinicore comps, which this really didn't actually end up solving because most of the Vex lines right now don't really go deep in Divinicore anyway. So we're still a little cautious here, as we want to make sure she performs as well as things like the buffed 4-cost Xayah. So as long as that's true, right? If Xayah and Vex are on the same level next patch, cool. This worked out great. But this is another one where, like, clearly the perception, we talked about player perception, very much against this right now. Shrinking the patch is good. So this is, I think, the final change. I think we've covered all the changes that got put in the A patch. So it's the Vex revert, Brand revert, Veigar revert, and Dynamo 2 revert. Yeah. There's also a bug fix for Hyperfang. Hyperfang is getting a bug fix, so that will also nerf Exotech. But yeah. All right, revert Alistar buff. He is decent early game. This is an interesting one because there is an element of truth to this player being correct. If you look at the round win rate of Alistar, specifically in Stage 2, this player's correct. Alistar is the best 2-star 1-cost champion you can get in Stage 2. That's true, right? Look at 2-1, 2-2, 2-3, 2-5. Absolutely the best. The second you hit Stage 3, though, absolute garbo. This champion drops off a cliff. Now, in this case, if you told me that we weren't supposed to buff Alistar 1 and 2, I could maybe see it. The buffs are minor as is. I do think there is something exciting about having a bruiser line, but this data and the fact that he falls off so quickly at Stage 3 definitely left us some concern. In addition, this is Alistar 3. And I included all the way to 2-1 so that you could see Build-A-Bud, because I believe I heard someone doing the rundown saying, I thought Alistar out of Build-A-Bud was good. It's not. It's not very good. In fact, it's the 4th worst option you can get, and you don't even average a 4.5, because if you see the LP delta here, a 0 LP delta means you average a 4.5. So if you get an Alistar out of Build-A-Bud, you average less than that. That is not good. Alistar 3 is really, really bad. So again, if you told me that this is a little too much for Alistar 1 and 2, but Alistar 3 needed the buff, I could believe it. But when we looked at this data and the fact that he fell off so quickly in 3-1 and didn't really have much to go for from there, we decided to keep the buff. We still think it's a good buff. We want Alistar, we talked about champions at different lines, Alistar 3 to be exciting. And I think from what I've played on PBE, he kind of is a lot more exciting now. So I think this buff is still relevant. Nerf Golden Ox much more, legit the best win-out trait ever existed. By the way, if these feel like they're in a random order, I'm literally just going through the post, so they're in the order that they're in the post. So Nerf Golden Ox much more. Yes and no. There's some truth to this, but also some false. If you look at 6 Golden Ox in our data right now, if you have 6 Golden Ox on 4-5, you'll still only have a 42.6% top 4 rate, but a 28% first place rate. That is insane. So when this player says the best win out trait ever, he's right. He's just right. That's true. It is a very good win out trait, which is why we're nerfing it, right? Like 28% win rate's a little bonkers. So we're nerfing it. Now it says nerf much more. One of the things I think is that when you see the patch notes and you see it go from 30 to 25%, you look at that and you're like, 5% less damage? That's nothing. That's not how it works. The way it works is that you have the base damage amp, and then the trait scales it up as you level it up based on that base. So for example, I took this screenshot from one of my high roll PBE games where we hit 111% with 6 Golden Ox. After the nerf, that will go down to 93% because it is the base of going from 30 to 25, which it's late 20% nerf. 5 out of 30, 1/6. No, so it's like whatever 1/6 is. It's late. Sorry, it's a 1/6 nerf, which is a pretty big nerf. And so when you see 111 go all the way down to 93, that's a big nerf. I actually think from what I tested on PBE, it might be a little too big. I actually mentioned it on the patch rundown that I think the actual number might be 26. But if I'm wrong, we'll change it. But this is why we put in this number, this big nerf, is yeah, it does cap way too high. And when you reach that really high point, those numbers got pretty insane. And so we need to tone that down a bit. So we'll see. Part of this was also the fact that we buffed Alistar, Aphelios, we nerfed Jarvan, buffed Annie a little, nerfed Viego. So overall, we expect it to be a nerf. I don't know if it needs to be nerfed much more, but we'll keep an eye on this. Nerf 4/6 Boombot, buff shitters instead, Giga trait with +1/2 emblems, bad without them. So there's an element of truth to this for sure, right? I actually agree with this player on the way Boombot is. The challenge we ran into is that getting this right with everything else we were doing was too large of a project for this patch and is better suited in a patch when there are less changes around. So for example, we're trying to get Cho'Gath to a good spot, but also fixing Cho'Gath while also nerfing Boombot and buffing Skarner and changing Fiddle. Like, it was a little too much. So we put out the Cog and Cho buff this patch to make those units better. And we're going to continue to monitor this. But this was one that, I'm just being honest, like, we just couldn't get to it in time to do it right. But again, I actually do agree that some of the truth here, I think we talk about Skarner a little later. But yeah, this player's not necessarily wrong. I will say I personally enjoy the fact that like Boombot Emblem or Boombot Mod are very exciting, but they might be too exciting. So yeah. Nerf Sejuani mana adjusted. So this one is definitely one of the hot topic ones that I think a lot of players are feeling. CC is always really frustrating. Generally, our 4-cost AoE CC champs are meant to be very strong when itemized. We want things like, whether it was like Jarvan or Elise from previous sets, like these are supposed to be some of the key, most contested 4-cost champions. We know that. Now, given Sejuani's weaker targeting, and what I mean by that is Jarvan and Elise were pretty much guaranteed to like hit the back line, hit the corner. They would dive to the right spot and usually hit. Whereas with Sejuani, she can actually, because she ults her current target, if you like wrap around her or get her to turn around, this ult can whiff pretty hard. And so the fact that she was like generally a little bit lower tankiness, as well as that weaker targeting, it felt appropriate for now. Now, that being said, I say for now, and you look at the data here, this is 2-star 4-cost. She's high up there, but she's not like grossly out of line or anything. But she's also like in so many compositions, her play rate is high. I understand the frustration here. And the fact that the itemization has been a lot optimized, like we're seeing a lot more vows than we were a week ago. And so that's pretty important. And so given all of that, there is a world where like, yes, we probably should have nerfed her mana 10, maybe 20. But for now, when we looked at all of this and we looked at all the changes, it didn't quite feel like the right time. And the fact that Exotech was getting hit by the Hollow Bow change, and we're a little nervous that like Exotech might not really be playable after that, plus now the Fang bug fix and things like that, we want to monitor it. So if after this patch we're still seeing Sejuani's all over the place and Exotech overperforming, yeah, Sejuani is absolutely the next place we want to hit. But it didn't feel correct right now given the information we had. Nerf Zac, the best scaling unit, the best endgame cap, the best of everything. So this is one of those things where it's like the player here is describing that Zac has a very high cap. Yes, that you are describing the design of the champion. Zac was intended to be a champion that when you get is weaker than a 5-cost, and as you get more and more blobs becomes equal to and then surpasses a 5-cost and becomes the absolute best cap to your comp. And if you somehow hit a game like I did where I hit 100 blobs, yeah, you probably win the game off that Zac. That is the intended design. That is what we were going for. That's intended. Now, you can disagree that that's good design, but we have to innovate in interesting ways in TFT. And Zac is a very memorable 5-cost for that reason. And I think he's very good for the game for that reason. And if we look at our data here, this is Zac 1. And even into the late game, 6-3 seems pretty fine. Obviously, this is going to be determined by how many blobs the player has. If this is a Zac with 50 blobs, I'm sure that changes. And we know Zac 1's a little weak. This is Zac 2. And even in the very, very late game, yeah, Zac's up there. But he's actually still below champions like Garen. Who Garen gives, all the mods and things like that. So currently this is intended and we're okay with this. For now, we don't want to nerf everything that's exciting. And I feel like if we take Zac and like buff his low point and nerf his strong point, he's just a flat, boring 5-cost. A lot of the player fun we're seeing, we talk about player perception, is like, whoa, look at this Zac I made. That was exciting. So we really want to keep Zac where he is. This is one where this is the design of the champion. Nerf Pirates, OP Black Market Augment. So again, I can't reveal the exact data of any augment that isn't changing, but what I can tell you is we looked at the data, he's balanced. Black Pirates is not OP. So it's really hard to look at that data and then go, yeah, we should definitely nerf this. So can't really justify that one. Nerf wise spending, much better than any other reroll augment. This person's correct. Absolutely correct. Wise spending is on the nerf list. The reason it didn't get nerfed was we talked about like loc lock. We lacked a good tuning lever and we didn't have any localization. It was Monday. We have no good answer. This is on our list to adjust or possibly disable if we don't have a good option. But right now, literally the only lever on it is, do you get 2 XP every time you roll or 1 XP? And if it's 1 XP, this augment is garbage. Absolute garbage. So this is way too big a nerf. So right now, the augment is OP. This is absolutely correct. Again, this is a decision. One of the times we have to make this tough decision. It's like, do we leave this augment in this state or do we disable it? What do we do? For now, our option was to leave it alone. It still creates exciting games that are very fun, but it is on our list. That's how we came to that decision. Nerf forward thinking, too much gold, man. This is one that, I'll be honest, when I went to look at the data to prepare this deck, I was expecting it to be balanced. I was not expecting it to be weak. I understand the sentiment here. I understand why the player feels this way. Seeing another player go from like 40 gold to 140 gold is like, holy cow, what's going on? But even the win rate on this thing is very, very low. And so when I'm looking at an augment that has a low win rate and is considered weak with our data, I can't justify a nerf just because someone has a high roll game with it. It still is winning games, which is good. That's, some augments should win games, but I can't justify a nerf here. Nerf pair of 4s, too much value for a gold augment. I checked. This person's absolutely right. Pair of 4s, honestly, it was barely over the line, so it didn't make our first pass when we were talking about patch size. Because when we were nerfing augments, it's like, well, we got to clearly hit the like 4.0s and 4.1s. This wasn't quite that level of OP, but it is OP. It is technically OP. And so I will try to get this in next patch. Hopefully as some of those OP ones come down, this one might become cream of the crop. But this player's right. Right now, pair of 4s, it's over that 4.3 line. So absolutely correct. Nerf rolling for days 1. 22G is a silver augment you can use instantly. I don't really like that comparison of like 22G. It's not 22G. You can't get interest off of it. It has one value, which is rerolls, which is why you get to have more value as rerolls. But I did double check, and it is in the balance. Now, it is right at the edge of balanced, but it is balanced. I could totally see -1 reroll. If you told me this patch or next patch we're supposed to do -1 reroll, I'd believe it. Again, when we talk about priorities, though, when something's in that balanced range, is that really where we want to be spending our time? Probably not, but that's why we didn't get to it. But not far off. It's close. The next two are pretty surprising. Nerf Dumbify, OP with extra gold, and there is a lot this set. The data on this one is really bad, like really bad. And again, this is top 1% of players. It's bad. It's weak. Now, I'm glad people are finding success for it, and this is one of the arguments for hiding augment stats, right? If this augment has bad stats, but people are looking at it going, it's strong, and here's how it's strong, and let me talk you how to play the situations. That's what a good augment should be. That's a good thing for the game. So I'm glad this exists. So cool. If there's good situations to take it, great. But overall, couldn't really justify a nerf given the data. On the other side of the coin, though, Golemify. Same thing, OP with extra gold, and there's a lot to set. I checked. They're right. This augment's busted. Probably the extra AD from the Golem. This one needs a nerf. It was below our priority line when we were doing our augment pass, but it is over. And so this should have been on the list, or like I said, barely on the list, but I'll make sure this gets in next patch. This one is over. Golemify is currently over the line. This is another one this player's running. Remove 10,000 IQ. It's wrong to play 2 strategists 3-1 due to this augment. Now, it's a bit of an exaggeration. I don't think you don't play 2 strategists just because this augment might appear, but this player is absolutely correct. This augment's bad. This augment is very bad. Ever since we took it out of 2-1, it's underperforming. This either needs a very large rework or we just need to remove it. Couldn't get to it this patch. So basically what I'm committing to is our next loc lock is this Friday. If we haven't figured out a better way to make this augment not terrible, it'll get removed. Absolutely correct. So, nerf max cap, lower amount of gold. This one is balanced, and not only is it balanced, so it's like, imagine it's like 4.5, the win rate's really bad, like really bad. So when I look at an augment that's in the balanced range and a very low win rate, I can't justify a nerf on that one. So this one I don't agree. Remove Starry Night. Might be too much work in this set, rebalancing reroll though. This is another one where I understand the sentiment. If you're a player that really doesn't like reroll, you look at this augment and it enables reroll to be a little bit more consistent. I have generally seen perception with other players though that actually Starry Night often isn't even worth the risk anymore. Because, you know, if you take Starry Night, yes, you hit, but you're going to have such a lower cap that you'd be better off taking something else like a combat augment, just because there's so many resources, you almost don't need Starry Night. But either way, I looked at the data and it says it's in the balanced range. And so when I have an augment that some people are enjoying, there's debates around, and it's imbalanced, I can't really justify a nerf or removal. Again, I know there are some players out there that really hate this augment existing. It feels strong. It enables reroll comps, but right now it didn't seem like it was worth a nerf. Young, Wild, and Free, gold nerf OP. Same thing, checked, very balanced. Hard to justify nerfing something that's in that range. Restart Mission nerf, kinda OP. Same thing. This is one that actually I understood the player perception that like when you get it in the right spot, it's like, oh damn, this is really good. But again, looking at the data, it's balanced and it's on the lower end of balanced. It's like, you know, I don't want to say the number, but it's like, it's definitely below 4.5. And it has a very low win rate. So again, when I look at those, I can't justify the nerf. We have to look at that and sort of go, nope, this seems fine. Kingslayer nerf, OP. So this is one that's actually really, really close. If you go by our rule of what OP balanced weak is, it's in balanced range. But the win rate is pretty high, likely tied to because you use it to like lose streak with Cypher, then hit Cypher, then get all that extra gold. And so the spots where it's really good and it has a high win rate. So I could see a nerf, but what I will say is if we nerf it, what'll happen is all the same things where I said it's playable is true is even more true. It's just going to get more narrow. And that's one of the challenges with a design like Kingslayer is that it's only going to be good in these exact situations. And so the weaker it gets, the more that becomes true. Right now, like I said, when you look at the data, it's like right on the line. So this is one where it's like, let's monitor, let's see how it changes as Cypher progresses. And if we need to nerf it later, we will. Nerf Shopping Spree, free gold, one of the best augments in the game, my opinion. This is another one where it's in the balanced. It is on the higher end of balanced. So I could see a tiny nerf someday, but it is still within the balanced range, which again, remember that's 4.3 or lower. So because of that, it's like with all the other things we're working on, I couldn't really justify focusing on this compared to all the other augments or things we should be addressing. Misfortune, Aurora nerf, 2 Dynamo nerf, 7 Syndicate nerf. You can buff her via other units as well. This is one I agree with. We talk about patch size. We already had a bunch of 4 cost changes. Misfortune fell below the line. If you look here, this is her round win rate data for Misfortune 2. And you can see in stage 4, she's okay, middle of the pack. The big challenge, though, is that Misfortune falls off a cliff. You can see here, starting at like 5.2, 5.3, she kind of quickly becomes the worst 4 cost. This is a problem. This is actually going to be a major focus for us in 14.4. We didn't get to it in 14.3, but I definitely agree. It's challenging because it's not going to be as simple as just buffing her damage number, because all that's going to do is make her stage 4 a little too dominating. I think that we're going to have to get a little more clever with how we fix this. Dumb example, and I'm not saying we're going to do this, would be like her bullets do a % health damage, so she's better at melting tanks, or the targeting changes slightly. Now, that being said, she is getting that bug fix, so we will see how the bug fix helps and if that changes anything at all. I don't think it will that much, but this is one where, yeah, we just didn't get to it in this case, but agree that Misfortune should be on the buff list next patch. Buff Darius 3. This one, you know, you look at the data, middle of the pack, not necessarily bad. This is Darius 3 specifically compared to other 2-cost 3-star units. But it's really hard to look at this data and go, he definitely needs to be buffed, while also buffing Alistar, Mundo, Cho'Gath, and Gragas, who needed it more. And so that's one of those things where if I also threw in a Darius 3 buff, I'd get the Reddit comments of lol buffing 5 bruisers, not like I'm not already getting them for 4 bruisers. So it was pretty hard to justify this. Now, that being said, the other thing is we will need to monitor how the TF changes land. Darius can be pretty tied to TF. Yes, I know Braum is a better version of it, but Darius can be tied to that. So if like the TF change ends up making him weaker in 2 week and it kills him completely, I could totally see Darius 3 falling off and this player end up being correct. So I'm not saying this player is incorrect. There is a world where it was correct to buff Darius 3, but it was hard to justify with the information we had. Buff Elise 2-star, 3-star, light buff though. They said a bunch of other stuff, and then they said something needs to be buffed around this champion. Agree. This is another one where I think we just missed it. Big part of this was we were waiting to see how Nitro really landed after the 14-2 changes. From what we've seen, Nitro has landed a bit on the weaker side. And so because Elise is very tied to that, as well as she's also tied to Dynamo, which is Misfortune. So she's on the weaker side right now. This is the Elise 3 data. And you can see she quickly becomes the second worst 3-star 3-cost. So yeah, Elise does need some love. Agree. Will likely be a focus in 14-4. Skarner, bad at everything. This one's interesting because again, we talk about the Boombots and things like that, but the Skarner data is not necessarily bad. This is Skarner 2. And you can see if you have a Skarner 2 at 2-1, yeah, it's actually like your average finish is pretty bad, but it slowly starts to rise as you put in Skarner for other things. Also, his round win rate isn't necessarily bad. Like if you have a Skarner 2 on 2-1, you can use it for a pretty decent round win rate. But there is a version where like this player's right. We should actually buff him a very tiny bit. It goes back to that whole Boombot versus champion discussion that was a larger project. This is the Skarner 3 data. And again, same thing. It's like middle to low of the pack. Not necessarily bad, just not great either. And so could keep an eye on this, but this is why we didn't do this one, is because it's just not the biggest fish to fry right now. And so we had to focus on other things. Illaoi light buff, not AP ratio though, helps Bastion and Anima. So this one, data-wise, is pretty interesting. If you look at, this is Illaoi 2. And if you look, Illaoi 2 round win rate in stage 2 and stage 3 even is like pretty good. Kind of like Alistar falls off a cliff pretty quick, but not terrible. LP Delta was low, but not the lowest. But this was a little bit of a risky change with Anima. Anima was getting a big, Froden calls them green sentence changes. But Anima Squad was getting a big change. And so buffing Illaoi while also buffing Anima Squad was a bit risky. We didn't want to buff both and then all of a sudden have Anima. Oh, and also the Xayah buff, which is pretty tied to that. So this is one where looking at the champion, kind of right, but didn't want to overkill on the Anima stuff. This is Illaoi 3. Now, Illaoi 3 actually looks pretty good. This is the round win rate data and actually seems pretty solid. It's like if you, because usually what's happening here is if you hit Illaoi 3 and likely you're playing her, that means you're probably playing 7 Anima Squad, at which point things are going pretty well. And that extra frontline really helps 7 Anima. So again, kind of risky here. Now, we'll talk about this later as well when Bastion gets mentioned, but they also said helps Bastion. And one of the things that was hard to justify here, and I can just show this with public stats, is like 6 Bastion has a 25% win rate. It is really hard to look at a comp with a 25% win rate. Now, remember, 6 Golden Ox at the time, that's like a 28%. I can't really justify buffing 6 Bastion. Now, I understand the perception because I find Bastion pretty challenging to play as well. So there might be something more to do there. But when I look at this data, I can't justify that buff. Graves, please, man, he need it. This one's tricky. Data is skewed by Golden Ox, obviously, because when Graves does well in the late game, it's because you've got him in a Golden Ox comp and he's doing well. Now, given the low win rate for stage 3, which is where Graves we would expect to be pretty good, right? If you have a Graves 2 in stage 3, that's when he's supposed to be really strong and he's supposed to fall off in like stage 4. I could see Graves needing a buff. The challenge here was he's also really tied to Alistar's performance. And with Alistar getting buffed and Graves getting buffed, that would have been really scary. I think it might have been too risky. But we'll continue to monitor it for 14.4. And again, if you look at the LP delta of a Graves, it's right in the middle. So when I'm looking at a champion that's right in the middle of their cost, it's like, is that really one of where we want to be focusing our efforts? Not usually. Again, not saying this player's wrong, because there are circumstances that can change here, but this is why I don't think we changed it. Renekton is mid. Now, this is Renekton 1 data, I believe, against some of the others. And you can see here he's doing pretty well, which makes sense. Renekton 1 has a lot of utility. You throw him in, and it's like you get that Divinicorp attack speed buff for your team. If you've got multiple Divinicorp, that's pretty valuable. Likely activate 2 Bastion, which is also a very powerful buff for your team. So Renekton 1 data being good makes sense. I don't think that's what this player was really pointing out, though. They were talking about Renekton 2. Renekton 2 does look a bit weak late game. Now, again, this is one where we didn't quite get to it because we were focusing on things like Urgot and the Kobuko rework. But if Renekton in 14.4 ends up being too weak, yeah, agree. And so, again, if you look at the 5 costs here, it was like Urgot went up, Samira went up. Those are the 2 below Renekton. And a lot of the top, Viego and Aurora, went down. And we know the others are Zac and Garen doing really, really well. Those ones are intended to be good. So Renekton didn't feel too far off. Which is kind of funny because that's actually what this player's saying. Renekton is mid. Kind of technically true. So, but we'll continue to monitor it. All right, buff Mana Flow 2 to 3.5. Again, check the data. It's like balanced, balanced. Hard to justify. Balance 1 for all 1 and 2. There is no reroll comps that use more than 3 1 costs. So this one I agree with. As a player, I will tell you, I have never picked these augments. I think they're absolute garbage. I never pick them. I looked at the data, and 1 for all 1 actually looks pretty balanced. Surprised me, to be honest. I was expecting it to be weak. 1 for all 2, on the other hand, very weak. Now, the reason we didn't buff it, though, is we buffed a lot of 1 costs, particularly Alistar and Mundo. I got big buffs. Zyra also got some buffs. So like a Zyra Seraphine would benefit from this pretty heavily. So it was a little risky to buff this. So we'll monitor it. And if 14.4 needs it, cool. But the reason we didn't was buffing a bunch of 1 costs and this was a recipe to possibly swing the other way. Buff dummy with a gun, such a fake augment. Okay, this is one of the big mysteries of our data. This augment is, if you go by a data, this augment is OP. Not just OP, OP. I'll be honest, I don't really understand it. We haven't really figured it out. We can't find any bugs with it. We looked. It seems like it's working fine, but in the data, this thing is bonkers. If anyone has any insights and understands why, let me know. But I can't take an augment that in our data looks OP and buff it. That's just not happening. I can't do that. So, yeah. Buff high voltage. This augment is bad for a few sets now. This is another one where, again, you go look at our data and it's like, it's OP. This one's not OP. It's just OP. But this one, we didn't nerf it because our perception, again, we talk about data and perception. The perception matches what this player's saying, right? Like most people look at this augment and they're like, high voltage, whatever. It's not that good. So it wasn't tied to an overperforming trait like that we're aware of. I know I like Spark Swarm, but that's not a real competitive comp or anything like that. So we're still investigating to see like why the data shows this is strong, but perception is weak. This is an example where data and perception don't match, which means for now we're going to leave it alone, but certainly can't really buff it, right? It can't really justify a buff when it's in the OP section of our framework. Buff, no scout, no pivot, HP. Yep, this player's just right. It's weak. Looked at the data, it's weak. We should have got this one. Fell below our line of priority with the patch. We'll get to it in 4.14, 14.4. But yep, this player's right. No scout, no pivot's weak. For God's sake, do something about reactive shell. Less value than silver bulky. I've been following this player for a while, and I've seen them talk about this augment in particular for a while. It's possible they're just underestimating the damage. I kind of want to investigate and see like what games this augment is succeeding in, but this is another example where I go look in our data. It's in OP. It's doing very well. The augment data on this augment is great. So, and again, I still think this is healthy for the game, right? It's like, if some people believe an augment is strong and some people believe an augment is weak, and we can have these discussions about it and sort of figure out where they're succeeding and where they're not and have these conversations, that's healthy for the TFT community. It's one of the reasons why I'm personally glad these augment stats are gone. But again, when you're talking about doing the balance changes, we look at this data and it's like, I cannot justify a nerf here. Buff 4 nitro damage boost by a lot. Yep. This is one where, again, I mentioned that we had just shipped that nitro adjustment from 14.2. We needed to see how it played out. And it ended up playing out pretty weak. I still want to see how nitro will land in 14.3, given all the other changes and things shifting. That being said, my expectation is that it's still a little weak. Things like the amp change could hypothetically help it. Other things coming down could help it. But I could totally see a world where it absolutely does need to be buffed. And the fact that here, even if you look at this data, the fact that you go from 3 nitro to 4 nitro and get weaker, that is not okay. That's not what we want. We definitely want going to 4 nitro to make you stronger. So we'll likely adjust in 14.4. Remove Cruel Pact, bad augment. So these next two, because they're black market augments, the sample size is really low, okay? We're talking... I can't say the number, low. We're talking these are very low sample size. But under that sample size we have, it's imbalanced. So it's hard to be sure here. I'm not going to definitively say, because of this low sample size, this augment is definitely balanced. That is not what I'm saying. Black market augments are weird. Could just be underexplored. But right now, it's hard to justify a nerf when you're looking at data going, looks pretty balanced. If anything, one of the things that the data tells us is that black market on 2-1 does not happen very often. And so this never really appears. So if anything, what the data is actually telling me is that we should be increasing black market on 2-1 a little bit. But also as a dev, I'm sort of like, no, I'm good. I don't need a bunch of black market 2-1 games. So for now, leaving it alone. Double Trouble's literally in the exact same boat. It's like it's like really close to Cruel Pact's play rate as well. And because of that, this is likely very underexplored, because what incentive is there to really find a perfect Double Trouble augment if you're going to see the augment in 1 in every 300 games, right? Like, that's just not really worth exploring. So the challenge here is there's just not enough incentive for the player base to actually explore good solves here, you know? But again, can't really justify a buff for that. Buff hard commit, gold every stage or something. Yep, this player's correct. This is another example where we looked at the augment data, we went, yep, this needs a buff. And then we looked at it and went, oh crap, we have no levers and we're past low clock. This one definitely does need a buff. But again, what can we really do? The only other level we have was changing the stage. And even that, last time we tried that was OP. So we need to change it. So yeah, something like, I think this player said gold every stage or something, could work. But we literally couldn't. We literally couldn't for this patch. Buff 6 Bastion. We talked about this before. I'm looking at the data and it's like 25% win rate. Hard to justify a buff there. Buff 4 Rapid Fire, slight buff. This is another one where we're just coming off a Zeri Hollowbow meta. And with the stats I'm looking at right here, it's like 17% win rate, 21% win rate for 6 Rapid Fire. I'll monitor it. We'll see how it happens after the Hollowbow fix. Right now, the expectation is that Zeri is actually going to be pretty weak next patch, considering the Hollowbow bug fix and her core item. I forget the name of it, but that one got nerfed pretty hard. There was even some argument that Zeri should have got buffed. We'll see how it plays out. But again, when I'm looking at these stats, it's hard to really be like, yeah, guys, we should definitely buff for Rapid Fire. So pretty sure 5, 6, 7 Divinicore also needs to be buffed, but Garen existed. So this is another one where we were just coming off 14.1, where Divinicore Zed was actually pretty solid. We're buffing Morgana and Gragas as well. There were also the Vex buffs at the time. Those have now since been reverted. And so with all of that, it was like, do you buff Morgana, Gragas, Vex, and the trait? Probably not. And again, looking at this data, it's not quite Bastion and Rapid Fire level data, but it's like still pretty solid data. It was hard to justify. But again, that doesn't mean this player's wrong. It could be that like things aren't really lining up, or it's only good in certain cases. The path might be too narrow, and so there's work to figure that out. But again, hard to really justify a buff here. Circlets are just a failed experiment. This is an interesting comment because it's such a hyperbolic statement where it's like it's a failed experiment. There are parts that have failed. He's absolutely right, but there are parts that have succeeded. The parts that have succeeded, removing the emblems from the gold augments on 3-2 and 4-2 has been good for the game, period. Like, no more do you just randomly get an Enforcer emblem on 4-2 from a gold augment, spike to 8 Enforcer, and just win the game off an augment that's sitting at like a 3.4 on 4-2. Those are all gone, thank God. That is absolutely a good thing, and I'm glad we made this change. I'm glad those are gone. That is important. It has lowered the amount of random prismatic traits. I know people still see 10 Anima and 10 Street Demon a lot, but the numbers are lower. You're seeing it less than you saw last set, which is a good thing. So there's no more 3.5 options on 4-2, right? Like our 4-2 augment balance is better than it was last set. Thank God. But to this player's credit, they're right in the sense that the problem with circlets right now is the power difference between the good ones and the bad ones is like... And nothing points this out more than the fact that the strongest 4-2 augment in the game right now is a circlet. It's Syndicate Circlet. And I'm not saying it's just the strongest circlet. It is the strongest 4-2 augment. It is the highest stats of any 4-2 augment. Syndicate Circlet. Now, obviously, that's because if you take it, you're in a position where it activates 7 Syndicate, which is strong. Duh. That's kind of the point. That's why it's a prismatic. But on the other end of the coin, the weakest 4-2 augment of the game, again, not weakest circlet, weakest augment, is Divinicore Circlet. Also, Marksman Circlet's pretty bad, and there's one other one. I can't remember the other one. But there's like 3 circlets that are sitting there right at the bottom. And because of those, this player's right? Like, those circlets are failures. Now, we made some changes in 14.2 to some of them, like Techie Circlet, for example, where it's like it gives you a brand, and that helped. That actually helped quite a bit of them. But some of them, we have more work to do, right? Like Marksman Circlet giving you an Aphelios when Aphelios is weak. Who cares? So we definitely still have work to do here, and we're going to keep improving the circlets. I don't really agree overall, though, that it's a failed experiment. I do think it is an overall healthier state, but I acknowledge the frustrating part of seeing a very bad circlet in your augment choices is a shitty experience. Agree. Finally, and this is a lot of them. I don't want to go through each one individually because they all have the same answer, but they go through item balance. Where the F is artifact changes. Nerf Silvermere Dawn defensive, nerf Monozane, nerf Unending Despair damage, nerf Sniper Focus, buff Innervating Locket, no RFC users in this set. Renekton. Hey, Shaco's not the worst. Brother, did you know there is an item called Spite? Flux Capacitor needs large compensation buff. When are we nerfing Radiant Shiv? Okay, honest answer, and again, believe me or not, but in both 14.1 and 14.2, when we had the outline, we actually had item changes in both patches, including a lot of these things, because it's actually really easy. This is another player-facing data that you have access to, right? You can literally click on items on tactics.tools, click artifacts, sort by like it did here, and it's like, yep, those are the OP ones, those are the bad ones. This is not rocket science, right? And it's like clearly the ones that are sitting in the 4.1 range we should be nerfing, and the ones at the bottom we should be buffing. It's very simple stuff here. Same with Radiant items, same with support items. And yes, I know Spite is sitting at the bottom of support items. The problem is, as I mentioned, one of our goals is keep patches small. We start with champs, traits, and augments. The patch got too big, and then we cut the items. It's like there's already too much. We don't need to keep doing that more. It sucks, and I actually really kind of regret that we had to do that. But the truth is, we did, right? It's like I had a Monozane nerf in there before, got pulled. I had, what was the other one? Silvermere. I had that one nerfed. The Radiant items, there had like 5 that were getting nerfed and 2 that were getting buffed. Had to pull those. It's one of the things that happens behind the scenes in development. It sucks. But the TLDR here is, again, this player's right? Like, again, the fact that Unending Despair is clearly the best artifact. That needs to be fixed. Absolutely true. So, there you go. Yeah, so this is me saying what I just said, which is like they both had them. Patches were too big. Now, the goal here is that assuming 14.3 does land decently, and 14.4 doesn't have to be a big patch again to fix a bunch of stuff. That's when we can finally get to these items and finally start doing that space to hopefully be like, hey, there's only a couple small champion changes, and here's the item changes, you know. And so that's part of our patch creation, things like that. So, and that's it. That's going through all of the feedback and talking about all the changes, and hopefully, because again, I think a lot of the things is like when people say like, how did the balance team even come to this? Well, hopefully this shows you how we were thinking about it and how we were approaching it. And it's not perfect, right? Like, assuming a lot more time, a lot of these patches are created as like, you know, a small part of the day. We have to get these created and then do other work on future sets and things like that. But that's how they get created. And hopefully this has given you some insight to how we think about it, how we approach balance in the content. And the thing is, the reality is there is a lot of content, right? Like, we only went over this player's recommended changes. We didn't go over every single champion. I'm sure there are some this player forgot. I'm sure there are augments this player forgot. I'm sure there are augments sitting in the OP bucket that we didn't quite get to because we didn't have a loc lever that this person didn't see, you know. But we're doing our best, and we're trying to make these patches as good as we can to give you a good player experience as much as we can. We are listening to your feedback. And when worst comes to worst, when we miss like we did in 14.2, whether it be for a bug or a bad Jarvan change or whatever, worst case scenario, it'll get fixed within the next patch, which is in 2 weeks. So you always know and hopefully can trust that we will fix the game and make it better. I know it's frustrating, but hopefully bear with us and understand and have trust in the TFT team that we're trying to make the best game for you. And we're always going to be improving that. And it's been almost 6 years now. Hopefully that's true. So, and like I said, hopefully this was useful to you. Hopefully I didn't just monologue for, I have no idea what time it is at this point. The clock's hidden. One more thing. I want to talk about one more thing to close out this video if you've made it this far. If you've made it this far, by the way, that is impressive. You're an obsessive fan, and I appreciate you, and I appreciate that. But I do want to talk about one more thing. I'm going to be stepping away from extra stuff for a while. The last few weeks, months have been really rough in the spotlight as the sort of target for a lot of the frustrations around TFT. All you have to do is click on any one of my Twitter posts recently and read the replies. I've been getting it a lot lately, to a point where I'm pretty burned out. I put a lot of extra effort in, and sometimes, you know, I've been advised many times that I put in too much effort. And it's, you know, at this point, I don't know how else to phrase it other than the haters win. They got to me, which sucks to admit after 6 years. But I'm going to take a break because I can't take much more of it. It is affecting me very harshly. So no more X posts for me for a while. I'm going to be staying off the platform. No more patch rundowns. Those were always an optional thing. They were not a Riot sponsored thing. I don't have to do them. So I'm not going to for a while. I'm probably not going to stream at all for a while. We'll see how long. If I do stream, it might be because like I really want to play a game and I have some time. I don't know if I'll do TFT streams for a while. But yeah, like I said, the level of animosity I've been getting has finally got to me after all this time. I don't know what triggered it recently. I also know that, to be fair, I'm not entirely innocent here because I've been getting so much. It has made me extra snappy. And so sometimes I snap back and it's a recurring pattern that gets really bad. So I think the right thing to do is take a break. We'll see how long it lasts. Who knows? Maybe TFT will be a better with me not around. And I say not around, like I'm still going to be behind the scenes working on the game. Nothing's changing in that regard. I'm still working at TFT. I'm just going to have a healthier relationship with it, hopefully, and not read all the vitriol kind of coming my way. So, yeah. There you go. All right. So, again, if you made it this far, I appreciate you. Again, how long is this video? An hour 20. That's not too bad. So, all right. Well, I don't know when I'll see you next. We'll see. I don't know. We'll play it by ear. So, until I see you next time, take it easy.